Welcome to this ATA Insights webinar. Thank you for your ongoing interest and support of our webinar program. Today's session will begin in 2 minutes. ATA Insights Webinars is an online platform for the dissemination of professional renewable energy knowledge across international borders. Our aim is to democratize access to information, for innovation to spread faster, and to make the industry more competitive. And we do this through our online sessions, open to all our members. Every year we do more than 100 sessions with over 250 speakers, 50,000 attendees from more than 50 countries. To participate in the session today, use the chat on the right-hand side to introduce yourself, your company, and where you're joining from. Under the screen, you will find the Q&A box, where you can send your questions for the speakers. We will get to as many as we can today. We're recording this session, and we will send you a link to the materials in a few days. Please consider supporting our content creation for the webinar program. Contact us on the email on screen. Welcome, everyone. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending where you're joining from today. I hope that you're all okay. And today we're here to talk online about energy security and decarbonization. And things have certainly changed in the last few years, especially about energy security, as we know, with the war in Ukraine and some technology dependence that we've seen over the past few years. Very much now the mood is changing in terms of how we place energy security in our priority ranking. So today we're discussing these both things in connection, and in particular we're going to be focusing on how Europe can balance these objectives, and we're going to bring lessons learned from other markets, which I think are very, very important. So I'd like to get you to meet some of our speakers today, our panelists today. So I'm going to ask first Robert and Dominic to please introduce yourselves.
Okay, good afternoon all. My name's Robert Futter, Director at Cresco Project Finance, based in Portugal. Looking at the moment after the African opportunities, but very much doing more work in the European space, and mostly really working for the buyers of power on their procurement journey. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon to everybody. Pleasure to be speaking with you today. My name is Dominic Gonçalves, also working for Cresco, specializing in decarbonization market and decarbonization solutions. We're helping a lot of corporate off-takers in Africa and Europe to do financial modeling, to help with procurement and transaction advisory, and with their energy strategy. So happy to be sharing some lessons and latest learnings and case studies from the space. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Robert and Dominic. I'm really looking forward to hearing your presentation, because we've known each other for a very long time, and I think you add a lot of value and you understand the industry really well. So I'm really looking forward to see, what you have in store for us. Next, I'd like to ask Martin, someone that I've known for many years as well, to please introduce yourself so people can get to know you a little bit better.
Yeah, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. My name is Martin Schlecht. I'm the Director Engineering and Projects at Dornier Suntrace, formerly known as Suntrace. We have joined the Dornier Group 3 years back. I'm heading all the technical projects, and we are an independent engineering advisor for solar and renewable projects around the globe. And I'm happy to share some African experience and see how it's applicable for Europe.
Thank you very much to the three of you. So this is very interesting today, because we're going to do a little bit of the reverse that we do other days. Other times we're like, oh, this is what we've done in Europe, now let's apply it to other markets. Today, Europe is learning from other markets, which is really, really interesting. And at the end of the day, different markets have different challenges, and those challenges can be lessons learned for us also in Europe. So we're going to have a really great opportunity today. So just a little bit about today for those that are in the audience. We have worked out an amazing webinar for you, seriously, you have in store an amazing webinar. It's very well structured. There is a lot of material to go through, but there is also the necessary help from you in the sense that we're going to have questions for you that we require you to answer. And we also need some questions from you, because the three speakers, we have prepared them structured, we prepared some questions, but it will be better if you send us your questions so that we can answer live the actual questions that you have. Okay, so this is not going to be one of those, I sit and listen, I'd like you to also step forward and participate and be part and engage in this webinar, please. So without further ado, the first person that is going to speak is Robert. So I'll ask Robert to please prepare your first slide. I'm just checking here. I have it written down to make sure that I don't forget anything. So if you can start, Robert, with your presentation, he's going to give us a little bit of context, and then we are going to ask you a question. So please be paying attention and be engaged, because I'm going to ask you very, very soon to participate. So Rob, if you get your let me see your unmute button. Can you unmute yourself, please?
Yeah.
There we go. And now you want to share your first screen? Yeah, perfect.
Yeah. Can you see my screen?
Almost here now. Perfect. Go right ahead.
There we go. Perfect. So good afternoon all again. Nice to meet you again. So I think as I mentioned, it's a little bit of reverse. I think due to what's happening in the African environment, off-grid, grids collapsing, I think we've all heard of this very bad word in South Africa called load shedding, is when there's not enough energy in the grid and therefore people are having to run their own generators. We believe there's a lot of case studies that we could show and present to the European market. Conscious that not all of them are quite like for like comparisons, but when it comes to at least the specific case study that I'm discussing, which is PV and BESS and large-scale decarbonization, I believe there's a lot of lessons to be learned. But first, we want to talk about a little bit of the definition and how clients are working through this. So initially, everyone focused on this thing called energy penetration, renewable energy penetration, and carbon neutrality. And slowly, I think very much driven by the Googles, the Amazons, sort of in various articles, we just use Google in this example. People have sort of focused more on the concept of 24/7 carbon-free electricity. So initially, everyone said, I'm 100% renewables, I've bought more energy than I have, but more and more people are going, well, is that true? Do the technologies we have allow you to achieve this? And I think just using the Google example here is they've actually gone and looked at each of their sites across the globe. I just have a snapshot of the US operations, and there they've tried to show the amount of renewable energy on a 24/7 basis, how much is green and how much is not. And you can see there in the middle, Iowa and Oklahoma are very green because they have access to the Great Lakes renewables and hydros, whereas Texas and other markets have more coal or fossil fuel bases, and therefore it's harder for them to produce. So for us and many of our clients now, we're taking the same thinking, 24/7 carbon-free electricity, and that's the concept that we've pushed through in the case study that's coming. And hopefully this sets the scene for the question that is going to be asked. Thank you.
All right, so thank you very much, Robert. Let's take this slide off for a minute, and I'm going to ask Lucia, please, if you can put the first poll on the screen so that people can see it. Here we go. So, the question is very, very simple. I'd like you to answer. On a 24/7 CFE energy calculator, percentage renewable penetration. One is 0 to 10%, then you pick option 1. If it's 11 to 25%, you pick option 2. If it's 25 to 40%, you pick option 3. If it's 41 to 60%, you pick option 4. And above 61%, you pick option 5. 5, right? Yes. So I'm going to give you a little bit more time because I see that you're not answering this as fast as I'd like. So here we go again. On a 24/7 CFE energy calculator, where's your percentage renewable penetration? So 0 to 10, 11 to 25, 25 to 40, 41 to 60, or above 61. So it's very simple. You only have to pick one of the questions, and we can see already. I can see already there is two questions, the two answers that are really neck and neck. They keep on changing, but one is clearly the winner. Well, clear, not by much actually, as it happens. So please, can I have just a few people? I know that there's a few more people that can actually give us their answers. Okay, come. Well, I'm going to count down. 5, 4, 3. Come on, there is a few more out there. 2, 1. Please finish the poll. Okay, can you share the results? Okay, here we go. Here we go. So what we have is that actually 25 to 40% is the largest answer. So that is 33% of the people think that 25 to 40% is the right answer. And then is followed closely by 11 to 25% at 23%. and next will be 0 to 10%, that is 21%. So with this in mind, Robert, can you continue with your presentation? Maybe comment a little bit.
Cool, thank you very much. Cool, am I back on? Philemon, am I back on?
Yes, sorry, you couldn't hear me because I didn't put my, you're back on and we can see your slide.
Brilliant. Thank you. So just a little bit about Cresco to give you a bit of relevance. So typically our client base are typical IPPs focused on the African market and emerging markets, more and more large energy users with single sites, in many cases above 100 megawatts, which I know in some parts of Europe is quite a large single load outside of refineries and large beneficiation. So we have a number of mining clients that tick that box. And then even down to smaller single loads in non-grid connected areas with 10 to 20 megawatt sites. So the size of the projects that we're involved in can really depend based on the requirements. Also smaller distributed energy users. So we're working with quite a few telecoms companies, data center companies, which have distributed loads within municipalities, urban areas in the middle of nowhere, all with requirements, financiers, investors, development finance institutions, and more and more climate finance, obviously the talk of the town. We unfortunately don't actually see as much climate finance finding a home as we would like. We believe the projects are getting there, and at the moment it's a little bit of a square peg in a round hole, but we do believe the market's changing, and then OEMs and technology providers. So in our experience, and as I said, this is very much talking the African theme and our clients here. On the left, we have our client base sort of set by the different sizes and capacities. I won't go through all the acronyms, but it's very much focused on large users. And then what we see is different clients wearing the buyer's hat on various stages of their energy journey. Some have started talking to the market, although looking at the poll that was come through, a lot of people, when they say penetration, that's hopefully their target, or in some cases they've probably achieved that. But in many cases, the clients have started the journey. They've started procuring some energy. So we're very excited that we're involved in a client who recently signed 800 megawatts of utility scale wind and PV and a few others. Some clients are pushing into the energy strategy stage. So that's looking at other technologies. And then we have some clients who've gone all the way through to having a full energy business. So diversifying away from their core, in this case, a commodity type client, to running an energy business because it's become so core for themselves and because they can no longer rely on the grid, or in some cases non-grid connected. So they need to take in control of themselves. So getting back to the South African situation, and unfortunately at the moment, not a happy story. So we have higher load shedding. So as mentioned, there's no energy in the grid, which means they have to make certain loads go off and available. That can either be done on a voluntary basis if you are a large user, or if you're residential or commercial, they basically just cut you. There's no chance. And over here, you can see how sadly through 2021 to 2023, the amount of load shedding hours has increased. And if you are a client who is requiring 24/7 electricity, not necessarily 24/7 carbon-free energy yet, although that's a target, unfortunately, that involves in most cases on-site diesel. And you can see there the sad correlation between diesel usage and load shedding hours. And unfortunately, that line expects to increase over time. There are plans in place to improve this, but unfortunately, in many cases, our clients have to take on board generation requirements for load shedding and resilience. So as I mentioned, on the left are our energy clients. And if we just look at what's happened between sort of last year, earlier 2021, 22, what we're doing this year and going forward, initially, it was very much looking at on-site renewable generation, and that's the purpose of the case study. Then to wheeling PV and wind, mostly wind, because in many cases, we don't have on-site wind availability. That's now moved to this energy strategy, looking at other technologies, cogeneration, battery storage. I think we'll unpack that in a lot more detail later. ESG and carbon offsets, and then what we're seeing, cross-border wheeling within the power pool, carbon offset projects being actually implemented, not talked about, and then just energy transition projects, which are becoming the talk of the town this year and going forward. And that is really part of the buyer's end-to-chain energy strategy with the various components. And it's no longer just about the PV panel. Everything needs to talk to the story themselves. So a little bit of a busy slide, but I'll touch on some key points. So we have a data center company, large operation in Johannesburg area, which is the largest industrial center in South Africa. a load profile that varied between COVID and post-COVID. They have on-site gas generation, a 4 megawatt tri-generation system. And they came to us and said, we need some help in installing a renewable energy solution. In this case, we did look at IPP and EPC, but the analysis here is purely on an EPC basis. So they're purchasing the equipment and then O&M over 5 years. And then we looked at a PV only solution, which, to be honest, they didn't really need us to tell them this was a good answer. We knew that already. We were there just to help them do the technical specs. A number of carports, so the amount of generation they could have on site was quite high. And then over here, you could see a PV plus BESS solution that came back. So really oversizing the battery energy storage in the early part of the day when the generation profile, these are fixed tilt on a roof, so they can't follow the sun and car parks, and then dispatching the PV in the early evenings. In South Africa, as in many sort of countries in Europe, we have time of use tariffs. So peak tariffs being probably 5 or 6 times the off-peak tariffs, and that's what the green, red, and yellow is, and we'll keep that color coding throughout the rest of the presentation. So we got 10 bids back, came back to 4 shortlisted bidders, and end up with some of the following results. So this is the project on the left, where we looked at sort of oversizing the generation in yellow. This is over a 72-hour day, so we have that anomaly in the one day where you have cloud cover and you actually don't have generation, and then you have the other day we have significant generation. So obviously this is a snapshot of a year. Not always like this, but you can see initially oversizing the PV and dispatching the battery in the gray section consistently over the periods. And then we have a gas load, which is the purple, really being offset over time. The client wanted to push to large-scale renewable penetration, both for energy requirements as well as load shedding requirements. So displace a diesel, and you can see here, this was a significantly higher battery solution. This did require a bit of adjacent land. This unfortunately hasn't been procured yet, but on the left is the one that's in procurement. And over here, this is then running batteries on a much longer basis, probably not the lithium ion ones that we're talking to here, but more long duration storage. So the one on the right, unfortunately, is an Excel spreadsheet at the moment. The one on the left is actually being procured. So very interesting. So taking that concept of 24/7 carbon-free energy, we have slides here that compare sort of the high-cost winter demand period, with the red being peak, green being off-peak, and standard being the yellow, versus generation. And what's interesting for this specific site is there's actually not a material difference between winter and summer. Small changes and really rounding errors in the generation with the gas being dispatched. So we have PV only with the black one, the red, the black ring in the middle. Then we have PV plus BESS, so significantly larger PV earlier going around, and that is largely being dispatched in the afternoon and then the early evenings and the mornings. And then we have gas generation supporting the grid around that. And then unfortunately, we have to still provide sort of from the grid on the other side. Under this scenario, including the gas, we're getting at least close to 55% penetration. So interesting dynamic there. So pretty similar. And sorry, the graph here is largely this graph on this page, but done on a 24/7 basis as per Google's presenting their slides. If we go to the financial analysis, completely different analysis here. So on the right, we can see here that really the PV and BESS is making some profit relative to the grid, certain times of the day being interesting in the gas, but not really much to write home about, to be honest, from a financial point of view. And you can see the cost of energy there, $$ per megawatt hour equivalent. However, in winter, when we have the hugely high demand seasons, specifically in the red, then at 7 and 8 o'clock at night, you're probably making 3 or 4 times what you're paying the grid from the BESS solution. And this for us is the real opportunity that we see out there. And for this specific client, we would love to take on more of the red and expand the project of the red, but unfortunately without the adjacent land being fully permitted. So that's a phased process, and that's currently undergone. This is the first stage implementation. But at the moment, what was very interesting for us out of this, because we did a similar analysis about a year ago, and there the BESS and PV solutions really didn't achieve quite the savings and the offsets that we saw. But with the current offers, all of which are really 60 days current, we see that the solution is a no-brainer. And for this client, our suggestion is go BESS, go large-scale PV, get to the 50% penetration, look at perhaps islanding part of your grid, so of your load, should I say, to offset the diesel demand, because renewables now is a no-brainer, is providing you security of supply as well as good pricing relative to what's there from a dollar point of view. From a renewable penetration point of view, unfortunately, we are limited by the PV and BESS only technology. So in a high cost season, you can see here that in the peak times, we're offsetting 31% of the energy, in the standard times, 63%, but off peak, which is really the nighttime, at 0%. So yes, we've made our first inroads into the bits that we expect to make, but without significant new technologies and development, and or perhaps wind, which in this case won't give you security of supply and hasn't been considered in this case study, we're really not eating into the larger CFE type requirements. If you look at the winter one, to be honest, the only change in the actual penetration levels between 44 and 59 is because time of use in South Africa is slightly different between summer and winter. You can see the red line sort of moving there. It's actually not because of the generation profile. So there's no real improvement, unfortunately, there. But we're starting to take some point. So the key takeaways that we're saying that affects coming into Europe that we see is relevant in the Southern African and the African experience is that for us at the moment, renewables and BESS is really a no-brainer for nearly any installation. For us, the best price points are here. In fact, in my view, for the European scenario, where I believe the cost of energy in certain jurisdictions, not all, is even higher than the price points we've showed here, that perhaps the renewable penetration would justify even bigger penetration subject to PV being available. 50% penetration, I think, supported by the poll that we had is definitely possible. And in some cases, people are oversizing their scope 2 to offset their scope 1. So we're seeing BESS and PV even being able to give that benefit. Achieving 24/7 outside of those normal PV and BESS hours at the moment, in our view, is still not yet viable for grid connected. I think non-grid connected, where you're using diesel and HFO all the time, I think that's a different price point and not covered in this thing. And unless you can get other technologies, in this case, wind and hydro, and my colleague Dominic will touch on some more interesting technologies we see out there, we're not really going to eat into the green area that I mentioned. And then the last point is that long duration storage is getting a lot of press. But based on the work we've done outside of really pump storage, we're still ending up with lithium-ion batteries. And most OEMs are really, the warranties and the 20-year options are really only the traditional technologies we see. This long duration storage stuff is more a marketing brochure, or the performance warranties are a lot more limited. So we'd love to see these new technologies come in and lots of positive press, but at the rock face where we're sitting in many cases, we're not quite seeing it come yet. We would hope that at the end of this year, if we did a similar analysis for another client or expand on this client, we might say that see the battery technology coming in here being more long duration in nature, and they're able to achieve the higher CFE levels that we mentioned. Cool. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Robert. This has been really, really interesting. I think your takeaways there are something that we can take it with, actually. So what you're saying is today 50% of like your load with renewables and battery energy storage is a no-brainer. 100% still far off. If I may ask, like, when do you see this becoming a bit of more realistic in terms of everything given, everything considered, for a company that'll be looking at, like Google or?
Yeah, so I mean, I think just my caveat for 50% is obviously you have enough space to have generation on site. That obviously is not always possible if you do have that opportunity. So, I mean, 100%, I think roughly is probably 4 to 5 years away, in my view, for large scale rollout. So we do need the long duration.
4 to 5, right? Not 4 to 5.
Yeah, 4 to 5 based on there.
Okay.
Yeah, 4 to 5 years. Yeah, and I think that the 3 reasons for that is one is we need the price points of energy to increase, to make this more viable, because as I'm sure Martin will mention later, getting higher penetration levels, it's a little bit of a law of diminishing returns as you get more PV and excess energy. So that's the one problem. I also think that, as I mentioned, we want to see these technologies implemented, not small scale and preferably financed with long-term project finance, because that's going to give you the scale. So yes, we have projects funded with equity, but only when the banks have seen 100 of these projects and they've worked 100 times will they physically give you limited recourse opportunities.
Yeah.
And then I also think that it's going to take a while to get there, because clients are still on this journey, and they first want to do the 50% penetration before they jump to the 100. And so a lot of our clients have said, why don't we wait if battery's not quite there yet, although we believe it, it's not as good as PV only, but it's still good. And they said, well, you're probably not going to go to the world's not the world's biggest, the largest battery as your first implementation step. And the technology is modular. So you want to walk the journey with the technology and understand how it interfaces. And I think all of that's going to take time. And if you look at a lot of our clients who are large mining companies, who their lost production, or a data center, their lost production is $100,000 an hour or whatever it is like that. They still believe in thermal energy as a backup. And so it's going to take a while for them to trust renewables enough to start going to the higher penetration.
Makes perfect sense. Thank you very much, Robert. And in terms of long duration storage, I mean, we've been talking about long duration storage, whether it's CSP, and actually one of the questions is about that, whether we're for I don't know how many years, decades, really, if I want to be completely honest, but it doesn't look like there is a clear now way that we're going to get there. You have here, it has limited implementation. Everyone's talking about, is just the modular nature of this, or is this the fact that we have too much gas? I mean, what is the reason behind this? How difficult it is being for long duration energy storage?
I won't compare with fossils, but if you just look at the cost of long duration in terms of the commodity input price. So we have a client who sells vanadium. They say, and we say to them, why aren't you becoming a battery storage company? They say, well, why would we sell vanadium at a lower price to become a battery storage entity? So I think the cost of the commodity is difficult. We are going to run out of lithium ion. It is a ugly mining method, and so therefore we will see bulk minerals become part of the long duration storage. And bulk minerals already have large mines set up. So the iron ore type, the nickel, the bromides, and those mines can achieve the scale of battery quantities required to drive a lot of these projections that we see. So we do need that to happen, and then the mining to be there to achieve those requirements, because there just isn't enough other technologies out there, and we need to get there. So the mining industry needs to stay track with the battery storage industry and the long duration storage, because they all need to talk together before we get large scale implementation.
But there is a question here, Robert, about concentrated solar power and whether we're going to see any new capacity of that, or anyone is thinking about that. Do you have a yes/no answer for that?
So we have a few technology providers who have sent us a few interesting opportunities, I guess, specifically for clients who use boilers and steam and things like that. Maybe not CSP to electricity, but CSP to thermal. We believe there's real opportunity. So in the sugar industry, why have a very expensive boiler where perhaps you could supplement your current boiler? In the packaging industry, they do a lot of CSP steam and that. So I believe that's probably the first point of interesting technology development. I think CSP plus a steam turbine does have their application, but at the moment the price points we've seen aren't quite there yet. But in the steam only without the electric component, we are seeing some implementation projects there, or feasibility. Don't think we've seen it implemented just yet.
Thank you very much. And just a final question, because I know we have to move on. Do you, considering the price points in Europe and the value for money, what would be the impact of going, in this kind of project and setting up this kind of project for industries?
So, I live in Portugal, where the cost of energy is quite a lot less than I understand what Martin's paying in Germany. So, but energy is going up. Time of use tariffs are increasing. Thermal projects or thermal generation are being downscaled in some cases over time. So, I believe the analysis that I did here, I think for most European countries, but earlier, this little megawatt hour with dollars would actually be even more positive from a viability point of view for a European example than this one here example.
Okay, thank you very much, Robert. And also consider that in most European countries now, there is a lot of decarbonization money as well, self-consumption. There is money from the government. So I think probably you're right, not only for this, but also with that, it's a no-brainer. So now I'd like to ask Dominic to move to actually for his presentation. But before that, I do have a poll for you guys. So Lucia, I'm going to ask you to please throw the second poll. I'm going to take this out. Okay, here we go. So now I would like to have you guys answering this question. This question is: large-scale battery energy storage systems are now being slowly implemented. What type of battery storage technologies do you see being deployed at scale in 2022, 2023? And it's a single choice, so you have to answer only one. The first one says only lithium ion. The second one says molten salt energy storage. The next one says flow batteries. The next one says liquefied air and compressed air. This is LAES and CAES is liquefied and compressed air. It's really hot right now. Like in many countries, we see like a lot of like startups, but I don't see that there is something that you like very much, guys. Come on, keep them coming. You haven't had enough answers for now, so please, I'd like to have a few more answers. The last one would be other storage or dispatchable systems such as fuel cells, green hydrogen, and so on and so forth. We are hearing a lot about green hydrogen. We could go into like a rabbit hole if we go down this line. So let me read again the options for you: lithium ion, molten salt thermal storage, flow batteries, liquefied air and compressed air, and other storage or dispatchable, such as fuel cells, green hydrogen, so we're going down the sort of like renewable gases, if you like. So I'm going to give you a countdown, just for the few last people to please answer it. And that would be 5, 4, 3, 2. Come on, I know you can get a few more. Go on. And close the poll. Here we go. So what we have here is only lithium ion, 39% of the people, which is quite a lot. Next would be other storage or dispatchable technologies, such as, here mainly is renewable fuels, green hydrogen, and then molten salt will come a third. Liquefied air and compressed air, no one thinks they have anything to add. So with that in mind, Dominic, I am sure you can bring this into your conversation now. If you can please show us your screen.
Great, fantastic. Thanks, Belén. Can you see my screen?
Yes, I can see. Yeah, perfect. There you go.
Perfect. So I only have 4 slides, so I'll try and be quick and to the point. I think that we've all observed, wherever you're sitting, that last year was a very bad year globally for electric grids. Due to various different issues, firstly, war, climate change, weather events, all sorts of things affecting both fossil fuel energy and renewable energy, I would say, to different levels. So yes, I think that we certainly are living through, this first phase of climate change, and what we've seen is how that has affected the grids in Europe, in the States, and in Africa. And yeah, I think we'd just like to share our view in saying that Africa has always dealt with energy security issues. And I think that this is only really coming to play quite recently in places like Europe and the States, etc., with less reliance on the grid. So yeah, from our side, I mean, there's been a lot of talk, as mentioned, in terms of long duration storage, in terms of green hydrogen, being 2 options that might be necessary to enable us to get to a grid of 100% renewables. In other words, to get fully off coal or gas, for example. And there's various issues with the grid. So there, of course, are bottlenecks on renewable energy projects trying to connect to the grid. Grid access has been a major issue all around the world. There's been an underinvestment in grid expansion, which is needed to handle decarbonization and also the decentralization that renewables provides. So as Rob mentioned, and I think as Martin will also mention, we're just sharing some lessons with what we've seen in places like Africa that typically are connected to a very weak grid. And in some cases, there, of course, is no grid at all when we have a fully captive operation, whether it's a mine or an industry operating in different parts of Africa. So I think that, looking at the start of winter, there was, a sense of some doom and gloom in terms of the grid risk that Europe was having, less reserve margin and various issues around interconnection, etc. Meanwhile, at that same period of time, and as we all know, that the winter was more mild than expected, which certainly helped. At the same time, the grid in South Africa, for example, partially collapsed in early December and has been in that state of partial collapse for 2.5 months now. So one thing that we've seen in the African and South African market is really an increased focus towards energy security by providing autonomy, by providing resilience, on-site generation where possible, if there's space, possibilities, behind the meter batteries, and whatever elements operations can provide to really get resilience from the grid. On this slide, a lot of really nice articles, media, press releases about long duration storage and green hydrogen. There's a lot of talk about the potential, what it can do, but still very low actual deployment. One thing that we've noticed, and I think everybody is feeling, is that all energy costs, of course, have gone up since COVID, both renewable energy and fossil fuels, and that these nascent technologies are still more expensive than what's commercially currently available and is currently heavily deployed. So it's going to take some time for those technologies to come to place. And meanwhile, we have what we have. So to say, using the South African example as an extreme example, but I think one that might get increasingly relevant over the next few years is looking at how much new renewable capacity and overall new energy capacity we need to put onto the grids. In Europe and globally, decarbonization is basically electrification to electrify our energy systems. We're switching from internal combustion engine cars to electric vehicles that will need to be charged on the grid, ideally by renewable energy. Unfortunately, we're seeing some examples in South Africa of the few Teslas and EVs we have on the road, sometimes getting charged by diesel. These things are not pleasant to observe and are certainly the worst of both cases. So, can we intelligently decarbonize our grids? We've seen that the energy crisis in Europe has caused a flurry of deployment of heat pumps, which also require electricity, digitalization, our sort of evolution of requiring and using more data and more digital applications for everything that we're doing also requires more power. Those data centers often are 24/7 stable loads, much not like a mining operation. And then also just simply that we need to deploy so much new hardware to result in a net zero power system globally. So we need new hardware for the equipment for solar panels and wind turbines, for batteries, for EVs, and for the grid itself. So there's a lot of work to be done. We believe that there's going to be a lot of demand for new generation. And what we're seeing is that, of course, there's a huge flurry on the sexier options, such as clean energy and solar and wind and green hydrogen. And increasingly long duration storage has also, posited itself as an attractive investment option, but relatively little investment or underinvestment in terms of power lines and transmission grids. So this expansion is rapidly needed. So what are we seeing in the African market that we think is relevant and that we think is certainly coming? We're seeing a lot of our corporate clients, mining groups, industrial groups, hospital groups, telecoms, etc., all demanding and wanting more autonomy and more resilience and more backup power. So are there decarbonization options? Are there backup power options that can compete against diesel in terms of cost? Can you have cleaner options that can provide backup power? Are fuel cells using either hydrogen, whether green or otherwise, or biogas? Are these options viable? At what scale do they stop making sense? Is this something that can only be deployed for small loads, etc.? So looking at all sorts of newer technologies and newer solutions to kind of come up and provide resilience. And then, so we're seeing certainly more demand for the more sophisticated solutions from the off-taker side, and we're seeing some of the more progressive developers start to, make real progress with newer technologies such as microgrids, and other decarbonization options. So yeah, that's what we're seeing. I think yeah, that's really the end of my presentation, and we can talk through, and more questions are certainly welcome. This is a space that is constantly evolving, constantly moving. I don't think anybody has the answers, but we just wanted to share what we are experiencing in a market that has had a real partial grid collapse, not from a weather or climate change event that might be a week or 2 or 3 weeks, but we in South Africa, for example, that has had a grid collapse for 2.5 months and will likely continue that way for a few years. And so how are corporates operating in the space, and how are IPPs and developers and even EPC contractors and OEMs sharpening their pencils and looking to provide solutions that I would say are increasingly more relevant to this unfortunate new reality of perhaps an extended energy crisis. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dominic. Just one question, really, like this new technology, that you bring in, from your know-how in Africa and what you've learned in South Africa and, in the mines, how do you see that actually working out in Europe, or what is the sort of the differences in implementation?
Yeah, good question, Beleng. So we are seeing an evolution in the contractual elements and, sort of trading elements, PPAs, energy attribute certificates, different mechanisms, energy trading. We're seeing an ad hoc energy trading market being created as we speak here in Africa. We're seeing the SAP, the Southern African Power Pool, make incredible progress in a period of 2 years. Really that's the way that the market are going. We're seeing that a lot of the large corporates are defining and creating this future and enabling it to happen. So we're seeing this new almost secondary ecosystem happening where there's government and public grid failure. We're seeing the private sector on both the consumer side and the developer or solution side step in. So that's certainly fantastic. But then in certain cases, as you're saying, you need to have generation in order to trade it. You need the grid in order to transport it. So in a lot of cases, wheeling and bilateral trading is very nice if you've got that power to begin with. But when you run out of power, you need power on site. And so that's what some of our clients are dealing with. So there's certainly a huge drive to try and create some, on-site and behind-the-meter applications of energy. And the one interesting thing is that when you're competing against diesel, almost any other technology makes sense because of how huge that cost is. And I think that the larger your load gets, the more expensive it is to run anything on diesel. It simply makes such little sense. So that means that point for some of the more expensive technologies to start to make sense with attractive payback periods is getting better and better. So we think that some of the newer technology solutions, the perfect place for them to be deployed is in places where you've got grid failure and where you've got clients that have critical load and they need to operate yes or yes, to use the Spanish expression, in that situation.
We love that expression.
So we are dealing with that. And I think that, one thing that Robert mentioned that I also think is interesting is that, renewable energy is often perceived from the outside to be a very profitable business with high IRRs. I think a lot of players in the space will notice that it's an extremely competitive business with very low IRRs. And as Robert mentioned, some players are actually hesitant to get into renewables once they see the actual returns. I would say that applies towards the simpler technologies. And what we are now seeing is this sort of fork in the road between having your lowest cost, high volume PV and wind PPA, which is excellent. And that's amazing for certain applications. But there's other applications where you need the power to be turned on like a tap. And for that, you need more sophisticated technologies. You sometimes need several technologies coupled together with storage. And that's somewhere that can also entice greater returns, of course, and greater profitability. Yep. So we're seeing greater fragmentation with that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Robert. Actually, I think in renewables, we have hung up still from the time that the government provided us tariffs, and it's always like lowest cost solution. And as a business, it's not very profitable at all, which is why the investment is nowhere near, for example, what fossil fuels are. And I think there was a recognition in the press, at least I saw an article in The Economist like 3 weeks, maybe 4 weeks ago, where they were saying, just let them earn money because you keep on cutting it. In Europe now, for example, all of the profits have been rechecked by the government and they put a ceiling in everything. They've been charged with extra levies and it's just not really a great business. So I get what you're saying. Yeah, for sure. So thank you very much. Now we have, I think, another poll before we move on to Martin. Sorry, Martin, just one more minute. If we can put the poll on, and then next is Martin, and then we'll have to ask questions, and you guys have been really quiet, so get ready with your questions. So this is the last poll that I'm going to send to you people in the public. Here we go. Are buyers considering critical loads and how to load shed or energy proof the critical loads against changing energy prices and supply constraints? I'll read it again because it's a lot going on in here. Are buyers considering critical loads and how to load shed or energy proof them against changing energy prices and supply constraints? So I think, are you looking to energy proof yourself? Are you looking to maybe load shed, prepare for this situation? And the answers are, it's not a concern. The grid is stable. Come on, you guys. I know some people in Europe have stable grids. Where are you? You're not voting. Vote, vote, vote. No, I haven't thought of this issue. This is the second option. The third option is, yes, I'm aware of this issue, but I actually haven't done any work on it. And this is most of the people are going in this direction. And the fourth is, yes, I'm in a feasibility stage. Ooh, we want to know more. Please put some comments, maybe in the chat so that we can read it. Or yes, I'm going to use it with battery energy storage systems. So I'm going to read it again, okay? I would like more votes, please, guys. There are more people. I can get more votes. I know I can. At least, a few more. So I'm going to read it again. The answer one is not a concern as the grid is stable. Answer two is no, I haven't thought of this issue. The third is yes, I am aware of this issue, but I actually don't have any work being done. The fourth is yes, I am in a feasibility stage. And the fifth is yes, and I'm going to use battery energy storage. So I'm going to give you a few more seconds. I know there is a few more votes out there. I know. So go on 5, 4, come on, make me proud, guys. 3, 2, and 1. Just the last one. I know there's one more. Come on. Okay, no, that's fine. Here it is. So as you can see now, a lot of people are like, not very many people are not concerned. Honestly, I thought this was going to be a little bit higher. Obviously, I am not very aware, of the kind of like the pressures and the risks that you're dealing with. Most of the people are saying that they're aware, but they're not doing anything about it. This is more than 40%. And the next two big answers are 23 and 23. Yes, I'm in a feasibility stage. And yes, I'm considering also battery energy storage. So here are the results that you can see it. Sorry, I thought that you could see it. So yes, aware of this 41%. Sorry, aware of it, but I'm not doing anything, 41%. Yes, I'm in feasibility, 23%. Yes, with battery energy storage, 23%. So here we go. It is more of a concern than maybe we would have considered. Martin, please, I'm going to ask you to share your presentation now. And guys, for the guys in the audience, this is the time where you send me questions. We're going to have a little bit of time when he's done. And I'd like to ask them. So please send them through. Martin, I can see your presentation. So off you go. Yes, perfect. Off you go.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, let me keep it short. I have 20 slides, but I will browse through them fairly quickly.
That's okay. 15 minutes. I think it's fine. We can do that. Thank you. Go for it.
I'm also even based in Germany, and knowing the Europe situation, we are active in a lot of geographies. And the case study that I'm sharing is the one from off-grid captive power supply and how it can be transferred into Europe in the way of thinking. So let me quickly explain roughly. I'm part of Dornier Suntrace, and formerly known as Suntrace until last year. We renamed to Dornier Suntrace, and we're part of Dornier Group, Berlin-based and internationally active engineering group on infrastructure. And we are the renewable people in the team from former Suntrace. We cover in the unit renewables, the solar, the wind, and also grids and storage. So all the elements that are relevant for integrating renewables into the network. And we provide independent, client-oriented, experienced advisory services. So we are not an EPC, we're not an IPP, we are a consultant basically, but we have a lot of that thinking mindset that developers also have, so we can help and guide our clients through that process. As I said, I'm looking at a captive case, but why would it be applicable? And the reasons, I'm sending it in forefront of my results. A captive renewable situation is also representative for a larger network like a national grid in some instances. So it's just a more variety of generation and consumers, but the principle is basically very similar. And also for the future in Europe, currently maybe people are overproducing by solar in the day and then they're just balancing it by taking power from the grid in the night. I don't think that has a future. So because everybody wants to have their renewable certificates. So if you are producing too much at the same time and all of them do the same, everybody gets carbon electricity in the night. So I think that mechanism sort of is poised to be adjusted to some point. So I think it's useful to look at a captive kind of scenario. So you can consume your energy by the hour and you produce it by the hour that is consumed. And that's why I think looking at high penetration renewables doesn't mean solar 100% no battery. It means you generate around the clock 24/7 as much as you need. And that's the challenge. And in Europe in particular, the challenge is the commercial case with the large storage. So the cost of storage definitely plays a big role. Looking at PV alone, you see if you oversize what you need for filling a storage, you will need to install more capacity than actually your load is. So if you in that case have 17 megawatts of load, maybe you install 25, you add a battery, you can reach like 60% penetration rate on a good day. If you go bigger, you see almost you're like 2.5 times of your capacity is being installed. If you put that to the storage, you can almost run through the night, not at all, not fully, but maybe you reach a very high penetration rate on a good day. But that doesn't help you in a bad day. And how do you assess the whole year? We have developed a modeling tool that is doing the energy balancing, because we did a lot with Homer in the first part, and then we didn't appreciate that the granularity was not provided by Homer that we wanted to see. So we developed our own model that can use time efficient in 1 minute time resolution and operate for the whole year. And it also looks into the economics, not only into the technical part. And for example, one typical graph, here it's a captive case where the black is produced by engines and the load is fairly stable. It's just fluctuating basically around the base load. You see there is a solar energy and there's a wind energy in blue and the solar in yellow. And you see that the green part is charging the battery and the white part is discharging it. So you fill some percentage of it. It just shows the principle of how the model works. If you look at a grid connected scenario, you can use a similar profile. Maybe then the black is just the grid power that you consume. Supposedly it's more predominantly carbon black. And then there is a storage option where you can discharge the storage, for example, during peak hours to reduce your peak tariff. It's a commercial decision on how to use the storage. And I looked at extended versions, including the wind. And there I look at 3 cases. One is to give a base case, basically maximize the solar during the day and then add wind. And then add also storage and increase wind and PV to fill the storage. And we do the annual cycle. This case study looks at the wind profile that is very nicely complementary, for example. So the seasonal wind profile, you can see here, there is a high wind in the winter month, and it's getting quite low in September, August, October area. It goes back up in November, December. And also the daily profile is good wind in the night and it drops during the daytime. So it's kind of complementary with the solar. You see the seasonal solar profile on the right part, where it peaks around March, April. So that's for a Western Africa location, not for Germany. Just to be sure that that's not yet reflecting German resources. It also drops around August, September. So obviously there will be some difficult period for getting the solar and the wind fill the needs. And this is an off-grid case study in Western Africa, 24/7 load, around 2,000 kilowatt hours per year solar irradiation, and roughly 7 to 8 meters per second on wind resource. So it's good location, not exceptionally good, but also not bad. And if you work on the solar side, for example, you oversize in that case to supply a secure meeting the demand during the middle of the day, because they don't want to use their engines for a couple of hours and they don't want to switch on and off the engines all the time with some fluctuations. And you see throughout the year, it's pretty much achieved, even in October. So the solar oversizing is quite big in that case. And then you end up having roughly 35% of renewable share in an annual average. And you see the brownish part is what you could get from the grid or what you also operate from the engines in this case. So it's the fossil part, and it's an average per every day. So the average consumes, and you see the spikes in the graph that show basically a maintenance period on the consumer side where they don't need the load. And only that during that period, you actually will have some curtailment of the renewable. When you add wind, you don't look at storage at this point, just wanted to show the difference. If you add the wind, given the complementarity of the profile, you see the day looks already very different. So the February day, you almost don't need any fossil energy. You don't need any backup. While on the June, you need some, and on October 11 and the 3rd, that's like 2 special days, you have so little wind that your fossil power will be required for a lot of the hours in the night when the sun is not shining. And if you have add that, you see there's the pinkish part is an excess. So there's a couple of months where you generate some excess during the peak hours, maybe also because the wind has some overlap with the solar. And it reaches 73% renewable share. And you see the engine load is still required almost all of the year, but you can see it in, let's say, December and also January, February, March. It's just very little. So maybe you get rid of that by adding a battery. And so that's what we did in the 3rd case. We added a battery and we increased solar and PV to understand how we can fill that gap. So in February, you see there is 0 grid use or fossil fired energy. In the June, there's some, and in the October, and it still doesn't really help. And when you now look at the annual profile, it covers more than 85%, almost 87 in this case. There's a huge excess in the winter season, and there is a lot use of the storage, charging and discharging during the shoulder months, let's say April, June, May, and then when the sun and the wind is low in the autumn, the African autumn, you still have like almost 40–50% load from the engines in an average. So that means they operate through the night, but don't in the day. And you can clearly see that you need a seasonal storage to bridge from the winter season where you have so much excess that basically your grid can operate 100% on renewables for like a 3 to 4 month period. While in the autumn, you need 50% from the fossil or from the grid. So if you oversize more to fill also this period, it would be totally unreasonable. And putting more battery storage also doesn't really help you because you cannot shift by battery storage from January to October. So the point is really that getting the last 15% is kind of an element maybe for the future. Maybe you can use the excess and create some green hydrogen on site and store it for later, and then you can operate it. At other times, in a grid-connected scenario, you can discharge that electricity to the network, and you maybe find another buyer that helps you to improve the economics of this case. But applying this case to off-grid location against heavy fuel oil, not even diesel. Heavy fuel oil is roughly at, let's say, 2/3 of the cost of diesel, maybe 3/4, 3/4. This huge renewable energy project will be paid back against fuel savings within 6 years. So there's a huge attractiveness in this renewable energy case because in the off-grid against the diesel power, this is already a commercial case. It's just that this kind of project has a size, a capital expenditure. The investment is very huge. So the crucial point maybe is, do you have the space? Are you willing to fund this investment upfront? Because after you paid for it and it's paid back, you have your energy cost at marginal cost, right? You just have OpEx and this energy plant will be operating. So the operational benefit will come after it's paid back. And so I think it's a really good investment case for the off-grid. And when batteries are going lower cost, or for example, carbon taxes are coming up and making fossil alternatives more expensive, also the business case will be here in Europe. And just putting this back into the European scenario, if there is a factory that needs to produce their products based on greenhouse. They need to reduce their carbon footprint, so they need to get rid of their scope 1 and scope 2 emissions. And the grid is only like 30% green, and the certificates are already used by other companies. How do you get your green energy if you don't procure it yourself? You may need to procure it under PPAs. You may build it next to your project in the fence, but you need to kind of connect the energy generation to your consumption by contract to make sure that you're not piggybacking on somebody, and then somebody, the system, will drop the rules and your piggybacking is suddenly empty. Yeah, that's basically my message on looking at bigger scale of renewables can make commercial sense. For a European case, definitely it's more critical. But if you look at power prices of last year, when the gas was high and the nukes in France were down, you had like 500 euros per megawatt hour. So if you use that price, every renewable will pay back even quicker as compared to the African case. So I leave you with that message, and also with the saying that we are good in analyzing scenarios like this on a case-by-case basis, not so much on the national network level, but on a consumer level. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Martin. I think there's a little bit of reflection there that made a lot of sense. You know, when the prices are high, you know, this pays right away, and with the help of the government, for example, this helps right away. But the thing is, I don't know, you guys are more in touch with the industries. The industries, they have their own role. You know, they're supposed to focus on when they're making money. Like energy is something that when they have to pick up, like it takes a lot of bandwidth. You know, so I think that sometimes the calculation is being made because there is no other choice because the prices are so high. But actually, it's something that is postponed if there is any kind of like grid, you know, that can take this issue. I think things are changing though now in Europe. I wanted to ask you just one thing. The storage, the battery energy storage, will it make the high penetration of renewables for an industry too expensive, perhaps? How do you see that evolving in the next few years?
I think battery storage pricing will drop, but there's a huge competition of this, particularly lithium batteries with electric vehicles, with solar home systems. And so currently, most of the battery manufacturers are producing for EV market that is growing and is basically taking all of that. There is a huge number of gigafactories announced, but as we all know, also there is not enough materials, raw materials to feed these factories. So there will be some sort of reality check on the gigafactories versus the raw materials. As I learned from a very interesting podcast, that can still be sufficient to grow because the numbers of gigafactories are just beyond what the market would need. And so it is a challenge to make all the material chains work, but it could fit in line with the growth. And if there is an attractiveness, it can work. So I think batteries will become cheaper. There will be more mass production, but they will not fall that cheap and come sort of for free. And so it will still remain a cost element. But being energy independent to some degree and supply your own green energy will, for a lot of producers, it will be a must way to go. And also others are doing it. So your product to be competitive needs to have a green certificate at some point in time. And then the cost is secondary, how you can achieve it. And the sooner you start, as Robert said, it's modular. So the elements you can implement today is like just a solar, not big battery. You can do that right away. And it comes at a lower cost as your utility price for sure. And even in Europe. And if you add a battery and you add more solar to charge and discharge the battery, or if there is a wind resource that is nice to tap, the lowest cost of energy is solar. The second lowest is wind, directly consumed. Anything that goes into the storage, out of the storage, you will add the ones through the cycle cost of the storage. That makes it more expensive. But that's the way to go. And the way is in stages. A renewable energy supply doesn't come like a nuclear plant. It's there, and then you have to fill the fuel, right? By the way, the fuel comes from Russia for the nuclear plant as well.
No way, really? Oh, this is another reason. No way. Like, this is the one thing that I thought, please no. Okay, go ahead.
No, I'm fine. So I think the storage cases will grow. And when the energy prices are high, or the volatility in the energy prices is high, the renewables serve as a hedge. Once you made that investment, you're kind of safe. All you have is OPEX, and the OPEX won't grow tremendously. So it really hedges your energy cost. And if the investment already is made at a commercially viable level, it will only help you to sustain your business.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that perhaps you didn't think you'd have to look at, but once you looked at it and you have it sorted, you know, it's going to make your life so much easier. I agree. And I think more companies are coming to this thinking. They also are seeing, you know, what is happening in Europe, the help, the financial help that's coming from the government, and they're switching. So I have a few questions for you. I know we're a little bit out of time, but just 5 more minutes. If you can't stay, don't worry, we're recording this. You can watch it after, you know, it's no problem, but it's just going to be 5 minutes. One, I have a question from Daniel here. I think it's for Dominic, but I'll open it in case, you know, the 2 questions that he has. He has one, what are the target IRR for banks to provide financing for projects? And the second is, how do the banks backstop a deal without a government guaranteed PPA? Very specific questions. Yeah.
Cool. So I mean, I think we just need to split funding into equity and debt. So I mean, debt providers want to get their money back with a reasonable return. We are seeing climate finance probably requiring a lower return than commercial finance, but probably not willing to be the first investor. So, you know, commercial banks are generally the most willing or have the ability to do project finance deals. And, you know, and they're coming in, and it really depends if it's dollar or rand or ruble, if we use the Russian example earlier. So things, but we're seeing margins coming down to 1 to 2%, depending on country risk, from that point of view there. On the equity return side, we have a lot of this discussion. We have clients come to us and say, potential, we've got money, we want to spend it. You know, what projects have you got for us? And there are a lot of projects. Unfortunately, I think Dominic mentioned this in his presentation, the return expectations need to be tempered. You know, we're looking at sub 10% returns, definitely in dollars, mid-teens in dollars, in rands, or an emerging market currency, probably close to 10, example, depending what's there, Brazilian real and whatever, like that, similar level. So, and that's because there is more money than good projects. You know, so I think that is what's there. If you are obviously and then that links to the offtake agreement. So we don't see very many government offtakes in the projects that we are involved in, perhaps sale of excess energy, or perhaps more large thermal anchor projects. But the ones that we deal with in our things are largely private sector IPPs or building themselves through their energy company, selling to large buyers. And that is the market that is growing, where you cut out the government stuff in the middle. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I wanted to ask also a question, if I may, about renewable gases, anything that's got to do with hydrogen that is very popular at the moment, and even biomethane. And how do you expect that to change potentially, you know, the, I don't know, gas purchasing of industries?
Let me maybe open, and then I'll actually hand to Martin, who might be better positioned than me. But I think what we're seeing here in the African market, and I think as we all know, you know, if we really want to get off coal and gas, and if you put nuclear aside for different reasons, but to get off coal and gas, you know, to really get to 100% renewables, you either need long duration storage, or you do need low carbon load following. And so those low carbon load following technologies, there's obviously different ones. Green hydrogen, you know, has received the most attention and the most sort of funding, and at different early stages of deployment, but has some constraints in terms of where the application makes sense. And I think Martin can maybe mention on that. I think that what we're seeing in Africa is that there's certainly a drive to use more waste feedstocks, to use things like anaerobic digestion and biogas and wastewater treatment reuse. And also, you know, a strong sort of, I would say, need for renewable diesel or biodiesel, which in some cases can be, you know, more expensive, 30% more expensive, whatever, but significantly cleaner. And I think so long as the food versus fuel argument is taken into account with the production of that is a sustainable, or can be a sustainable option in terms of supplementing diesel and supplementing coal and gas, etc. But these are still only available on small scale, and with a lot of specific demand from off-takers to develop or to implement those solutions. So I think that there's still a long way to go. I think that there's a lot of scope of prospective demand for these types of solutions, but the cost is still high, the deployment is still low. I think it's an interesting space to watch. Martin, what are your views on green hydrogen and other low carbon load following fuels for getting rid of that last long tail of 20% coal and gas?
I mean, I'm sure we will use hydrogen in a 100% green economy. I don't see it around the corner. It's too expensive. No one's talking cost. There's no, the whole story of producing the hydrogen, logistics about it, and consumers actually paying for it, that whole value chain doesn't really exist. The technology is not yet matured in a large scale. So the whole market needs to develop, and it kind of is a chicken and egg situation. Who starts first? The consumers implementing equipment to use hydrogen, but then not getting it, or the ones producing it, but not having a users. So most likely it's interesting to use first the hard to decarbonize stuff like ammonia. It's made from carbon coal right now. So if you change that to green ammonia, you can implement large scale of green hydrogen, and having already a market, you just need to make sure these guys are also paying for the green ammonia. They're not going back to the black ammonia pricing. So that's a regulatory start. On other parts, the last 15%, you know, let's tackle it when the time comes. We see if there's different other seasonal storage methods, if hydrogen is a case. So let's go for the 85% in the first place. I mean, there's still so much to go, and it's so modular to put solar, it's so modular to put wind, and use electricity at the cheapest. And you also have so much energy efficiency reduction potential where you can actually reduce your consumption. That's the best, the lowest cost savings is to not consume it in the first place. So let's observe the hydrogen space, leave it to the guys that needs to bring it to fruition. And in the small use cases, I don't think it's going to be a fast track solution. And if you wait for it to happen, you lose 10 years, 15 years, and then you're still starting from scratch. So I don't think waiting for hydrogen is the method to do at this point. It will play a role, and the role will come to fill the gaps and to decarbonize what you cannot decarbonize by electricity or by batteries. And so let's go for what is already available. Let's not waste time discussing innovative solutions that are not ripe, not mature, not big scale available. That's my point.
Thank you very much, Martin. I mean, there is something to be said, isn't there? Like there is technology, and then there is the time where the technology is ripe, or is the time has come. And I think all of us here have worked, for example, in concentrated solar power for like 10 years, and then the market quite never really got there. And the reason is because if we were writing a market from scratch today and there was absolutely nothing, those would be probably the best solutions we would have. But we don't start from nothing. We start from a market that is already developed, and infrastructure is already there, and jobs that already exist, and stakeholders that already have power. So when you're trying to change that into an energy transition, that is where it gets tricky, you know, especially when people are in the middle. And there you start to kind of like make changes and see. The biggest problem that we have at the moment is that before, like all of the grid planners and all of the energy planners would have to worry about is demand, and then respond to that demand with supply by burning things. That was the fossil fuel way. It was easy. You just respond to demand, you're done, you follow demand. The problem is now we have two axes, and one of the axes is resource and the other axis is demand. And matching that up is a lot harder. And we're still with that fossil fuel mindset that, oh, I need to follow, you know, what I need, I just burn it. But here is the complexity of these kind of systems that you could see it in there, you know, how they change through the months, through the days, through the weeks, and what this means. Like you always, like, you know, Martin, all of you have mentioned the seasonal storage, you know. Okay, seasonal storage would help here because that would allow me to shift loads from one season to the next. But those are not solutions that are in our infrastructure from before. How do you pay for that? That doesn't exist before. So we have to be playing. I think, Martin, you had a very good point there that we need to get to it, you know, when we get to it, essentially. But I think that we are now, for the first time, seeing the complexity of the system. And I think for the first time, we're realizing that when a few years ago we said concentrated solar power was expensive, or we're still saying it, we're not valuing it, for example, for all of the value that it has. And I think that's the case for most long duration storage. So
you know,
Yeah,
We're
go on,
not seeing
Martin.
the
Yeah.
complexity on the fossil fuels, right? Digging them up, taking them out of the ground, refining them,
That's
bringing
sorted
them
for
to the
us.
end
Someone's
user,
making a
having-
lot of money for them. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot of money, but it's also a lot of complexity that was established, right? And so just use it to burn and produce electricity, cuts off all the other part. But the renewables
No,
are
I
just
agree.
coming from the nature for free, and you're quitting all of that logistics on the forefront, and you have some complexity in balancing it. So you just changed the complexity to a new part.
Yeah, I mean, that's a fair point. Even though, some companies already completely took ownership of that area, like, so, but I understand where you're coming from. So anyway, anyhow, I hope that you enjoyed this webinar today. Thank you very much, Martin. Thank you very much, Dominic and Robert. And to all of you, thank you very much for being there. I'll see you in the next one, and we'll send you the recordings and the presentations so you can see them again. Feel free to reach out to the speakers. Their names, their emails were there. These are people who have been working in the industry for a long time. And if you have any questions that is specifically about this topic, I honestly don't think you can ask anyone with more knowledge on it. And I think that the issue of working with like unstable grids has given you guys the right know-how that you're able to solve any other problems that may now arise. So thank you very much, and see you next time. Bye.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Renee. Thanks to the
Thank you.
other team.
Bye.
Thanks to everybody who dialed in.
Thank you.